Here to react to all of it, Brett Tolman joins us now. He's a former U.S. attorney and executive director of Right on Crime. Sir, good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me, Vince.
There's a lot of, I think, what's the phrase that people use? Misinformation going out right now about yesterday's Supreme Court decision. As I understand it, Brett Tolman, this is in many ways a commentary on what the Biden administration has been doing that they shouldn't have been doing, which is prosecuting Biden's political opponent.
Yeah, Vince, I think that's right. This Supreme Court has now issued 4 incredibly important decisions, which, if you look at all of them, it is aimed at curbing the executive power, and it's also gets rid of the administrative state and bureaucracy, and it's about reining in power, not expanding power. And you know how they interpret this is purely. It's kids that don't like the rules and they're throwing a tantrum because they want to be the ones to set the rules. And that's what we're seeing now, is this loud screaming and yelling and gnashing of teeth and claiming that it's going to result. Well, the truth of the matter is the law is exactly the same today with respect to presidential immunity as it was prior to this decision.
Sure, but even the Supreme Court justices writing in the dissent, that was the 3 left-wing justices who wrote yesterday, they are insisting that this allows the President of the United States, in their words, to use SEAL Team 6 to assassinate his political opponent. Is that your conclusion, Brett Tolman? When you see the majority opinion yesterday, you're like, oh man, I can't believe SEAL Team 6 is about to start killing all the politicians.
Yeah, Look, I thought this would be a unanimous decision. It is as clear, the law is as clear as it could be on immunity for a president. If it's official acts, there's immunity. If it's unofficial, there's not. And the court said the same. Mm-hmm. The political diatribe that the dissent is one of the more low IQ analysis I've ever seen by Supreme Court justices. I've never read anything like it. It's filled with fear mongering, and the reality is, if the president used a drone to take out his political opponent, it would be unofficial, unofficial conduct, and would not be covered by immunity. And those are the easy cases. Where it's not simple is when you try to manipulate the facts and the law, and try to pursue the case without showing the grand jury which are unofficial acts and which are official acts. And that is all the Supreme Court did, was say, Jack Smith, you have to put the evidence first. Let the judge see the evidence before you go after a former president.
Also, it's pretty obvious that the way the left is reacting yesterday was merely out of political expedience for the moment, because if they took a deep breath, they would realize that yesterday's decision also affords protections to Joe Biden in his post-presidency, in the sense that he can't be prosecuted for any official acts that he takes as president of the United States.
Well, that's exactly right, and it's where we are now as a country. The left wants to get rid of rules and draft legislation all based on emotion and the immediate, emotional reaction to an issue or a problem. And that's why we get so many bad laws, because they don't think, long term. They have no long game. There's not careful, thoughtful analysis, and there's not even the realization that, hey, maybe we shouldn't do this because it could be used against us later.
Do you think that the Supreme Court saved the immunity decision for the final day of the session because they're concerned about the threat that the left poses to the court? When I say the threat, I don't mean in any sort of standard political way or something. I mean legitimate threats to the court from the left.
Yeah, we're seeing, this. How ironic that Joe Biden, the Democrats, the Justices Ginsburg, and every other justice that's ever been asked about packing the court, going after the court, taking out justices. They've all been consistent. Don't do it. It is established for 9 people. You'll expand all the problems that you have. You'll see the court more politically than it's ever been if you try to do it. And yeah, I think right now, the court, if you actually look at the 20 plus decisions that were turned out over the last several weeks, remarkable. Less than than a half of them were decided along political lines, and a number of them were decided with a mix of political appointees on the side, and several unanimous. So this is not a time to panic. Our republic is actually being restored to its checks and balances that it should be. And the side that's been trying to use the law to go after its political opponents doesn't like that they have been properly chastised.
Yes, no, I completely agree with you. And I've been very encouraged by all of these decisions in this past week, in particular, Chevron deference being overturned, meaning the federal agencies no longer have the power to invent laws. They have to rely on Congress to actually write the laws. The decision in the SEC case saying that you can't be subjected to a star chamber by the federal government. You're entitled to a real jury trial if they accuse you of wrongdoing. Those are all super important decisions for sure, and one of many. But as I talk about the threats to the court, I mean like straight up threats to burn down the court, threats to assassinate Supreme Court justices. The justices have had to endure, that is, the justices who adhere to the Constitution have had to endure very real and legitimate threats to their well-being from the American left in recent years. And there's a strong part of me that suspects, Brett Tolman, that they saved the Trump immunity decision, the presidential immunity decision, for the very last day of the session, because that is how out of control the left has been about this issue.
Yeah, and you saw that Merrick Garland's DOJ was not willing to step in and aggressively investigate several very credible threats. One that had, he had put together all the tools to actually go commit the crime against conservative justice. And yes. I think you're right. We also see that politicians are not helping by lying to the American people about what this decision means and calling for impeachment and calling for other things, because that gives anxiety and unrest to those that are upset already about the Supreme Court.
In light of all of these decisions in the last week, as you point out, that are helping to restore our constitutional republic, do you expect that we'll get a flurry of court cases to kind of deal with those things? So, for instance, Chevron deference gets overturned. You have to imagine that there's a lot more court action on the way in order to establish, what the law actually is and the agencies who are overstepping their authorities.
Yeah, for sure. The Chevron doctrine being repealed, I mean, this is the biggest case to come out of the Supreme Court in 40, 50 years, and it reins in the bureaucratic state. And it wasn't just that they were, basically making law. They were enacting law, they were enforcing the law, and then they were themselves the judge of whether or not it was fair or not. And so this restores the three branches of the government to how it should be, and it is an absolute gut punch to this growing bureaucracy that threatens to undermine our constitutional protections and all of our civil liberties.
Yeah, it's just a massive, massive deal. And then there's the January 6th case. There's the Fisher case that came out. That's one of those cases where you had some unusual political alliances because it was the conservative justices joined by Ketanji Brown Jackson, actually, who crossed the aisle. And in so doing, what they concluded was that this, obstruction of Congress charge that Jack Smith and the U.S. Attorney in D.C., Matthew Graves, have been dropping on not just Trump, but specifically all of the January 6th defendants, it's been improperly applied. This is only for evidence destruction cases, not for walking into the Capitol building. That seems like, once again, a restoration of the proper balance of things and a rejection of some very real tyranny coming out of the Biden Justice Department.
Well, that's right. It is a correction, course correction. We have given so much power to prosecutors with no accountability, no transparency, and this is the end result, that they push the limit of what statute they can use or manipulate. So it's proper in reining in the prosecutors, but it's even bigger because if you read that in connection with the immunity case, it directly guts Jack Smith's most important charges against the president in Washington, D.C., where he's most vulnerable. And so regardless of whether Jack Smith, for example, can show that the conduct related to the Capitol against Donald Trump is unofficial, the Fisher case comes in and indicates doesn't matter at this point, not even a question of immunity, because it's a wrongful application of the statute.
So based on all of these developments, what is the likeliness that any more court proceedings actually take place where President Trump has to be in court and confronting any of this ahead of the election?
Yeah, it's a great question, because the Supreme Court in the immunity decision did clarify that if you bring a charge against President Trump or any former president for the time actions while they're president, and you claim that it's unofficial conduct that you're charging, if any of the evidence it relates to official conduct, then you have to strip that out of the case. And every single case from Georgia to Manhattan has evidence that is arguably official conduct by President Trump.
Yes.
So it's going to be very difficult to justify. You'll have the sentencing now, which has been pushed off to September in the Manhattan case.
Yeah.
They're going to be reviewing motions. So I would predict there's going to be a slew of motions in every single case now.
That Manhattan case, if I can focus on that for a moment, that Manhattan case is the only one that the left has scored convictions on. They had a New York jury to find Trump guilty
Correct.
in that case. How in peril are those convictions now, and how likely is it that they could possibly be overturned? Because the evidence in the case, as you point out, does involve portions of time where Trump was in office, testimony from people from the White House, and it also involves evidence about, I think, Trump signing checks that they used as evidence inside of this trial during his time as president of the United States. It sounds to me like it very much could place the case itself in jeopardy. Is that possible?
Yeah, if you watch the case, this thing on its own could crumble, and it was mostly a dumpster fire of bad rulings and bad witnesses and inaccurate, description of the applicable laws. So it was a mess to begin with.
Right.
Now you add on top of this, exactly how you described it, which was perfect. There's evidence that came in that is certainly official conduct by the president. It was used to try to bolster their conviction. That alone, if it goes as far as the Supreme Court, would cause a reversal in the case.
Yeah.
If Merchan if he was bright and thoughtful, he'd get rid of the case right now.
Yeah. Well, their tyranny has made them reckless, and now it's catching up with them, apparently. Yeah. Thank you very much. Brett Tolman, former U.S. Attorney, Executive Director from Right on Crime. Sir, good to have you with us today. Very insightful.
Thanks, Vince.
Thank you very much.